Welcome to this workshop on data management and statistical analysis using SPSS. During the workshop, you'll learn how to interact with SPSS to manage data and to conduct statistical analysis. SPSS is a user-friendly program that facilitates data management and statistical analysis. And this workshop will provide an introduction to navigating and using the SPSS program. The most important question in a research project is conceptual, and statistical analysis can only be helpful when research questions are clearly formulated. I'm frequently asked, are my data statistically significant? The data in question often contain many variables, for example, answers to surveys, and the researcher might be interested in a whole range of issues, each one of which needs to be clearly formulated. During the workshop, we'll explore what this means. There is an accompanying formative workshop where you will have a chance to explore a real data set from one of my research projects. The workshop is based on material in the book Discovering Statistics Using SPSS by Andy Field. And in the book, Andy Field writes, I want to answer the kinds of questions that I found myself asking while learning statistics and using SPSS as an undergraduate. Things like, how can I understand how the statistical test works without knowing too much about the maths? What does that button do? What does this output mean? SPSS has many options for each test, many of which are overlooked by books and tutors alike. I hope to explain what these options actually do and why you might use them. And you can learn more at Andy Field's website here. So, what we're going to be doing in this workshop is we're going to be using SPSS. We're going to be doing a variety of things, starting from opening a program, using a data set, creating some simple graphs and doing some basic statistics. And we're going to be using a variety of files which will be available to you on the KLE and which I'm going to demonstrate today. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to open the SPSS program, and I'm now going to switch and show you how to open the SPSS program on your computer. When SPSS is installed on a computer, you can either open it from the Start menu here. You can see, in this case, it's shown here. You can see IBM SPSS. And you can click on the item, or you can click on one of the files that have recently been opened. Or if a shortcut has been created on the screen, you can click on the shortcut and that will open the program as well. When we open SPSS, we will see a screen that looks like this. It tells you that this is IBM SPSS and it has new data set, new database query, a list of files, some information. I'm just going to close this screen. I don't normally use this screen at all. I'm just going to close it. And this is the more familiar screen that we'll start with. We'll see it's a blank sheet. It looks a bit like an Excel sheet. And down here we have data view and variable view, which we will explore in a minute. And up here we have a list of icons that you can choose from. Before we begin using the workshop, I'm just going to look at some settings. These are things that you only need to do once if you haven't opened SPSS before, but it will greatly help you in interpreting your data. So I'm just going to click on Edit up here, and then I'm going to click on Options down here, and you will see that this window opens, and you can see there's a list of options here. I'm just going to look at two of these, and if you're going to use the program yourself, then you should make sure that you follow this step. Sometimes people don't do this, and the outcome can be a bit confusing. The first thing is, under variable lists, I want to make sure that it displays names, not labels. We will look later at the distinction between names and labels. I also, when I look at my variables, I want to look at them in alphabetical order. Again, this is very useful when we're analysing data, And the only other tab that I'm going to look at here is the Output tab. And you'll see it says Outline Labeling, Variables and Items shown below. There's a few options. I want the most information when I'm looking at the output, so I'm going to click on Names and Labels. Similarly for variables, I want values and labels. And then when we're looking at tables, we just have to repeat this as well, names and labels and values and labels. So that's what it should look like. Names and labels, values and labels, repeated twice, and we'll click apply. And that's, you only need to do once. You don't need to do it again, and it will greatly help with the rest of the analysis. Having set up SPSS, we're now ready to start analyzing data. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to open a file, and I'm going to go to File here on the left. It's not new data. I'm going to open data that already exists. There are a few options shown on the right, and I'm going to click on Data. And this takes me to the folder on the data where the data are stored. And in this case, I'm going to open a file called university.sav. So data files in SPSS always have the suffix .sav. So we'll put that in there, and then we'll open it. Okay, so the data set is now opened, and what we see is a screen that looks like this. What we have here are variable names and job, friends, alcohol, etc., with some information about these variables. And we have data views. So already there's a difference between the way that SPSS looks and, for example, the way that Excel looks. Excel looks a bit like this, but underneath the data we have information about the data. So we can see that there are 5 variables in this file. We can see that there are information about people's jobs, what job they have, number of friends they have, alcohol, income, and neuroticism. And one way that in which SPSS differs from some other programs, sorry, I didn't mean to do that, is that we can put values on the data. This is very helpful when analyzing the data. And you can see that if I double click on that, there are 2 values for this variable, lecturer and job. So what we have is data on lecturers and jobs. You can see that for each variable there's also a label. Now I would have put in more labels to explain what these things are. In this case, we can see there's only one label against the variable income, and it tells us that it means annual income. So that's enough about that screen. There are some other options, but they're not that important for the time being. I suppose one thing to mention is that the data are all numeric data. They're all numbers. It is possible to have text in SPSS as well. So I'm now going to click onto the data view here. So what we have is we can see that there are data from 10 individuals. So first of all, let's look at the distinction between columns, which represent variables, and rows, which represent individual cases. So we can see for each case the data that we have. And if you remember that for one of the variables, job, although the data is coded numerically, there was an underlying label attached with it. And if we go up to the top and we click here, you can see that it changes to lecturer and student. So that's just helpful if you want to look at the data. The data will be analysed numerically, as we'll see, but in terms of the output, we will see that it will put the label beside the data, and this can be very useful. So the next thing that we're going to do is that we're going to start analysing the data. You can see up at the top we have all these options, one of which is analyze. There are many analytic options within SPSS, going from the very simple through to more complex. We're just going to start with simple descriptive statistics. So we're going to click on the frequencies tab here, and we can see that the 5 variables in this file have been moved into the left-hand box. They started off here, they've been moved in here. So we can select any variables we want. We can move them from the left-hand box to the right-hand box. We're just going to click on statistics, and because the last time I had clicked various things, these are already shown. We can see the mean, the median, and the mode, which are measures of central tendency. I could click them off. I'm going to click them back on. And I'm also going to look at measures of dispersion, standard deviation, the minimum and the maximum. So you can see there are many things that you can do even at the most simple level. We're going to do continue. And you can see there's a little tick in this box that says display frequency table. Because we only had 10 cases in this file, that's okay. We'll have a look at the frequencies. Sometimes we might have thousands of cases, in which case it wouldn't really be practical to look at the overall frequencies. We would just want the summaries. So we would say okay to that, and we can see that this window opens here, and we can see there's a description of the what's been done on the left hand side. There's also syntax at the top. Although we're using the Windows version of SPSS, it is also possible to type in commands, which sometimes people do when they're more experienced. For now, we'll just look at the output, and here we can see, so the first part of the output is the summary statistics. It tells us that there's 10 valid cases, there's no missing data for any of the variables, and it tells us the mean. Obviously, you need to know what the underlying values for the variables are for this to have any meaning. It tells us the mean, the median, and the mode, and we saw the standard deviation, which is a measure of data spread, and we see the minimum and the maximum values for each of these variables. So that's useful to understand what the summary measures look like. And here we can see, we go down a little bit lower, we can see, because we clicked on the showing the frequency tables, we can see the 10 values for alcohol ranging from 5 to 30. 2 people had a value of 20. We can see the valid percentage of each of these scores, and we can also see the cumulative percentage. Obviously, by the time we get to the top value, everybody has a value. For the first value of 5, one person, that's 10% of the cases. So there's already more detail than there would be in Excel. So that's the first thing that we're going to look at. So having looked at ways of doing frequency distribution in numerical terms, we're going to look at some ways of graphing data now, and we're going to look at a file called glastonbury.sav. So glastonbury.sav is some data collected by a biologist who was interested in the health effects of music festivals. So one year she goes to Glastonbury and measures the hygiene of 810 people who attended over the 3 days of the festival. In theory, each person was measured on each day, but because it was difficult to track people down, there are some missing data on days 2 and 3. Hygiene was measured using a standardized technique that results in a score on a continuous scale going from 0 to low hygiene to 5 to hygiene. And we're going to look at some ways of graphing that data. So the first thing that we'll do is we will open the file. So we'll go to File, Open Data, just as we did before. And this time we'll open the file called Glastonbury Festival here. We'll open the file. We can see the variable view. We can see there's 4 variables, day 1, day 2, day 3, as we just described. We could have used different variable names, and I can rename these variables if I like as well. And we can see labels, as I mentioned before, telling us a little bit about that variable. And then I can switch to the data view, and I can see the subject number. So there's a lot more data than there was for the university.sav. It's going down into the hundreds here. Remember, there's 810 people. And there's a score for day 1, day 2, and day 3. And unlike the last data file, we can see that there are some missing data points for day 2 and day 3. Missing data are very common in analysis, and you have to think of ways of how to deal with missing data. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to check the data, just make sure that the data looks okay. And to do this, we're going to use one of the graph procedures. So we're going to go to Graph, Chart Builder. In a minute, we'll see the window open for the chart builder. You can see the chart builder here. There's lots of different types of graphs, bar charts, line charts. We're going to choose histogram. I want to do a histogram to get a frequency distribution. So I'm going to click on histogram. There's different types of histograms. You'll see this one, the simple histogram. That's the one I want. So I just need to drag that into this box here. This is the box where you create charts. And I want to get a histogram for the frequencies of day one. So all I need to do is drag day one over. I don't need to look at any of the other options, and I'm just going to press OK for that. You can see down here it says running graph. It runs the graph, and you'll see that we have a histogram of the data at day one. If you remember, all the values should be between 0 and 5, but if we look at the graph closely, we can see the scale goes up to 25, which alerts us to the fact that there's something not quite right. And actually, we can see that there's it looks like there's one case around about the 20 mark, which isn't right. It doesn't tell us what case that is, but there is a way of finding that out, which we're going to do next. So we're going to try to find the outlying case next. It's always a good idea before you proceed with any analysis to check the data. Just make sure that it looks okay, that there's no funny values or anything like that. So one way of doing that is we can plot a histogram of the data. So we can see the data here. We're just going to plot a histogram of it now. So we're going to go into Graph, Chart Builder, and we can see that there's lots of different options here. Scattergrams, bar charts. There's a lot of options for producing interesting graphs. The ones that we're going to look at just now is a histogram. We just want a histogram of a single variable. There's other types, but we'll just take this one, drag it into here. Because I've already done something on day one hygiene, it's already appearing here. If I wanted to change it, I could take it, but day one is what I want. So I don't need to drag it in, but I'll just do it again just to demonstrate. All the other options are okay. There are lots of other options within the chart that you might want to explore, but for now we're just going to look at histogram. So we press OK to that, and you can see that it's again, you can see the commands here. They're not really necessary unless you're going to use syntax later on. The important thing is this histogram, which is a frequency distribution. Remember, we have a scale going from 0 to 5, so that's good. We can see a sort of standard frequency distribution looks fairly normal. However, the scale goes up to 25, which is odd. And actually, if we look closely, we can see that it looks like there's a single value here. Now, we don't know what case that is, but in the next part, we'll have a look and see a way of identifying. So next, we're going to look at how to find an outlying case. And again, we're going to go back to the graph option. We're going to click on Chart Builder. And when it comes up, you can see that it's still on histogram, but this time I want to do a box plot, which is another way of summarizing data. And I'm going to select the one on the right hand side, which is a simple box plot. I'm going to bring it into the box. So you can see it replaces the histogram. I don't need to look at any other options. I just want to look at day one because I suspected there was something not quite right. And here again, we can see the output. Now here we can see the box plot showing the distribution of the data down here with the thick line representing the medium. Where it's got a number beside it, that indicates that the program thinks that it might be an outlying case. This one is okay, 574, because we can see it's within the 0 to 5 range. But this one, 611, has got a value of 20. So obviously we want to investigate that a bit further. So at this point, what we can do is click on the window, and we've still got University of Sav open. We don't want that. We want Glastonbury Festival. Click on that. We're going to go down to case 611. Now this is using, note that this is using not the subject number, but SPSS's own internal numbering of the cases. And we can see here that a value, it seems to have a value of 20.02, which is not correct. Obviously, they just put in an extra 0. If I wanted to, I could click on that, remove the 0, save the file, and we'll have corrected the error. I'm not going to do that just now, but that's something that you can do. So I'm just showing you in this section ways that you can explore the data and make sure that the data is okay. So we've looked at the data for one day, but what about the data for day 2 and day 3? There could be outlying values there as well. So what we're going to do is have a look at that. Now, one of the things about SPSS, there are multiple ways sometimes of doing different things. The best way that I've found of looking at the data for all 3 days is not to use the chart builder. It may be possible, but I've used the legacy dialogues. Legacy dialogues are things which people have asked to be kept in from previous versions because they've found useful. So sometimes there are useful ways. So it's very similar to the chart builder, but just a slightly simpler format. So this time, again, you can see all the options. I'm going to go to box plot here, and I'm going to go to I want a simple one. I want separate variables, and I'm going to say define for that. So this time it's got the more traditional way of opening commands in SPSS. So I want to look at days 1, 2 to 3. So I'm going to select all them. I held down the shift button to select all 3, bring them into here. Now, instead of proceeding, I'm just going to click on options, because the default is to exclude cases listwise. In other words, this would, if a case has any missing value, you can see over here, for example, if a case has missing value, it will not include that whole case in the analysis. I don't want that. I want to include all available data for each case. So I'm going to click on exclude cases variable by variable. This means, for example, when I'm looking at the data for day 2, it would include this case here. It wouldn't have included it if I'd clicked on the listwise option. So that's okay. We can continue, and we will get another graph in a minute. Okay, so now we can see the data for all 3 days. So again, we can see the data just as we saw for day 1 with this outlying value up here. But the other days look okay, so we don't need to worry about them. So as I said before, the dark line here represents the medium. The bit from the top of the box to the top represents the top quartile of the data. The blue shaded area represents the middle 50%, and the area under here represents the bottom 25% of the data. So yeah, as I said earlier, this is just a useful procedure for